started. Again, my name's Cynthia. So for the workshop, I'm basically just going to be following along with the worksheet so that you have all the information to take home and the context for all the information. So seed starting. I think it's like one of the most fun parts of growing. Like I love starting seeds in the spring and seeing all the bright green stuff come up, and I think it's something that a lot of people find intimidating, but as long as you have the basics of the information, like, then you're good to go. I think it seems intimidating, but it's super easy. So we'll start off the top of the worksheet. Why start your own seeds? A big reason is cost savings. Buying a packet of seeds for like $5 is obviously going to give you a lot more than buying one single plant for $5. Variety is also super important. So every vegetable comes with like a bunch of different varieties, and they're all tailored to grow in certain environments. So it's really important to grow varieties of vegetables that are tailored to our environment. So our zone is zone 5B. So a lot of plants like, let's say a tomato might be more suited for greenhouse growing than growing outside, or a broccoli plant might be more suited for hot weather than cold weather. So growing varieties that are made to grow in our environment is super important. And also healthier plants. A lot of the plants at like Agway and stuff, you know, they're being shipped from other places. They are being roughed up in transportation. So if you start your own, you not only know that they're being taken care of, but you know that you're not having your plants exposed to other plant diseases that you might bring into your own garden. I know especially with like tomatoes, they can come in already with blight, and nobody wants to bring blight into their garden. So if you start your own seeds, you already know you're good to go. Whatever diseases your plants have, they're already there. So supplies needed. So we have a resource list. A lot of these things, it's going to be on the second page of your packet. A lot of these things are optional, but a lot of the things are necessary. So the first thing on the list is a seed starting mix. So we specifically buy our own seed starting mix. Kind of looks like that. Nice light soil. Seed starting soil is different from potting soil. So you'll see potting soil a lot at like garden centers. Seed starting mix is lower in nutrients like nitrogen and stuff like that, and it's also lighter, and it usually comes with a lot of the white stuff, which is vermiculite, which helps maintain moisture in the soil. The reason that we do that is because seeds are a little bit more sensitive than a full-grown plant. They don't need a ton of nutrients. They don't need super heavy soil. When you're transporting seedlings, it's really nice to have something light and fluffy that you're not lugging big heavy soil around. If you don't have a seed starting mix, you can make your own. Sometimes it's a little harder to find like designated seed starting mix at a garden center, but you'll find potting soil. You can mix like a third potting soil, a third something like peat moss or cocoa coir, something that's really light that adds air to your soil. And like I said, vermiculite, you can also find that at the store to mix in with your seed starting mix. Another thing you'll need is containers. Cocoa coir. I don't know if I'm saying that right, because
yeah. Cocoa. It's just it's like ground up.
Actually, I think. Yeah.
It helps mix in and like it helps like.
It looks like this.
Yeah.
So we get chunks of it in our seed starting soil.
Okay. I think I've seen that in like little plants that you already buy in one little pot.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. It's.
Coconut wire.
Yep. Or peat moss. I feel like peat moss is probably easier to find. Coconut coir is a little bit harder, but it's up in the air about which one's better to use. Coconut coir is generally considered more environmentally friendly than the peat moss.
Kind of like reusing a waste product.
Yep.
Peat moss, which is harvested from the ground.
So a lot of people go with the coconut, but whatever you can find, it works. Containers and trays. So there's a lot of different things you can use for containers. Here at the farm, we generally use these big black trays. We use these just because they're big. We can fit a lot of plants in there. But for a home gardener, it might be easier to find something you already have at home. A lot of people will use takeout trays, which is what I have, a takeout tray here. A lot of people use egg cartons, like anything you can find that will hold soil and drain water. So in the tray, I poked holes in the bottom. You always want to make sure that whatever you're using, the water can drain through. If you have something that doesn't have holes in it, this is my mistake here. We used one of these trays and then I realized we never poked holes in it. And you can see how like damp the soil is. It's really dark and damp. It's starting to get green on the top because there's moss growing on the top. And that's because there's no drainage. It could also cause your seeds to rot in the dirt if they're too wet and they can't dry out occasionally. It's usually, it's really important to have some drainage in the container you're using. So if you're using egg cartons, it's really simple. It's cardboard. The water's going to come through. But if you're using something that's plastic, you want to make sure you poke some holes in the bottom. Seeds. That's a big thing. If you're starting seeds, you're going to want to get some seeds. We do have a list on here of some different places you can buy seeds from. VINES does offer some free seeds when we can. We usually have like tons of extra that gets donated to us. So anything you want, we probably have at least some of it. For us, the two places we normally buy seeds from are a place called High Mowing Organic Seeds and Johnny's Seeds. Johnny's is really good because they have a huge selection of organic, non-organic, like basically anything you want, Johnny's has it. But they are like a very big company. I like buying from High Mowing because they focus more on buying local seeds and getting seeds from farmers. And so buying from High Mowing, you're supporting other farmers who are interested in seed saving, and you know that a lot of their varieties, since they are a northeastern company, they're suited for northeastern growing. You can get seeds at Agway, Lowe's. They usually will sell Burpee or Fairy Morse, which are all great seed companies. Another really cool place to look at is Baker Creek, and that's online at rareseeds.com. I like Baker Creek because it is rareseeds.com. They have a lot more varieties that you wouldn't normally find. A lot of varieties that are more, I don't think rare should be the word, but not usually grown around here. More cultural foods and stuff that you'd see. Like they have a ton of varieties of peppers that most people don't grow around here, but are culturally significant to other parts of the world. So it's a really cool place to look if you're looking for something that you might not find around here. What other places? Strictly medicinal. They grow medicinal seeds. If you're looking for medicinal herbs for your garden.
Fruition seeds. That's
Fruition.
Here.
Yep.
Out of the Finger Lakes region, just in Naples, New York. They do a lot of very sort of like local, regionally appropriate seeds. Small farm.
Yep.
Great people.
Yep. They also have great fruit plants, like fruit bushes, fruit trees too, that they sell. All right. So when it comes to the seeds, you can buy seeds in a lot of different size packets. Obviously for us, we're growing a lot of stuff. So like this is 250 squash seeds, but most gardeners aren't going to buy in that large a quantity. But it's hard to find, you know, if you want one squash plant, it's hard to find one squash seed. So if you have extras left over at the end of the season, you're going to want to store them for the next year. So it's important to store seeds in a cool, dry place. You don't want to expose them to a lot of temperature fluctuation. You don't want to expose them to a lot of moisture fluctuation because that might cause them to start germinating prematurely, or just, you know, it's going to cause issues with the seeds. So you always want to store them in a cool, dry, temperature stable place. Certain seeds will last longer in storage than others. There's really easy charts online. If you just type in like seed viability chart, it'll give you like a whole list of different charts that tell you how long certain seeds will last. Like onions, they only last like a year. So you don't want to buy a whole bunch of extra onion seed, but like something like a brassica, like kale or cabbage, broccoli, those seeds tend to last like at least 2 to 3 years in storage. So they, if you have extra seeds left over, a quick Google search, be like, can I store these seeds? How long would they last? We'll let you know if they're going to be good for the next year. If you do have stored seed already, a germination test is a really easy way to tell if your seed's good. You basically wet a paper towel, stick 10 seeds in the paper towel, close it up, stick it in a plastic bag, and leave it on like your fridge or just like a warm place. And then check back in like a week or two and see if any of them have germinated. If all of them germinated, then your seeds are good. If only half of them germinated, then you know about like half of your seeds good. If none of them germinated, your seed's no longer good. You're gonna have to buy new stuff. So, any questions so far?
Well, I see you have little, containers there.
Yes.
Is there an advantage between just putting them in a big container, or?
There is. So for us, we have a lot of plants that we do. And the advantage of growing in things like this is I can put one seed in here, and then when the plant's ready, I can just pop it right out, stick it in the ground. It's super easy. As opposed to these, I have to like separate them out. But the advantage to these is I can stick a lot of seeds in here, and if some don't germinate, I'm not like using a lot of extra soil and a lot of extra space for like one seed that didn't germinate. Whereas this, if this one doesn't germinate, that's a whole square of soil and space that I just basically wasted. So when I'm doing seeds, like basically the only thing that I will start in these are onions, because onions are a pain to pick every single separate little onion apart. So it's easy when you're planting, even if they don't germinate, I'm like, yeah, it's fine. You know, it's much easier just to pull each individual one out. But so I start them in these, and I think we'll get to that a little bit later about up potting. So I started them in these, and if they're too crowded for space, I'll move them over to these to give them a little bit more space to grow. But for home gardening, I think it's easier just to start seeds in an open container and then up pot them, it's called, if you need to later. It's mostly just a space issue for us, yeah. All right, so when should you start seeding? The first thing to determine is when your last frost date is going to be. Generally around here, we can expect to see frost into May. I think most farmers plan for a last frost date as being like the end of May. So we know like May's over, we're probably good. It does happen where we get frosts in early June, but we all cross our fingers and we hope that doesn't happen. But
usually not in the urban setting.
Yeah.
We'll have a frost date that's probably like a week and a half, 2 weeks earlier than if you're out in the country or at slightly higher elevation.
Yeah, if you live up in the hills, you're going to have to plan a little bit later because you are higher in elevation. You're going to get a little bit more frost. And your seed packet should tell you how long you should start them before you plant them. So like, I don't have a tomato packet here, but like on a tomato packet, it'll say plant 6 weeks before frost. So you know, like, okay, so if I plan on planting on June 1st, I should start them in the middle of April, 6 weeks before. So just think a little bit ahead, be like, all right, what am I growing this year? Look at the seed packets. You can even write it out, make a little plan. You're like, okay, I'm going to start my cabbages mid-March. I'm going to start my tomatoes mid-April. It's just good to know what you're doing and have a little plan. Your seed packets also have most of the information you need to grow the plant. So like on this one, it says how many seeds come in the packet, when I should plant before frost, how far apart each plant should be. It gives you most of the information you're going to need to grow the variety. So super interesting. I always like to kind of keep my seed packets around until I know the plants are good and in the ground, just in case I need to go back and look, get more information from the packet. Okay. And I will start with a little demonstration. So I'm going to do this because I feel like this is more the scale that most people are going to be at instead of this big giant thing. So I've got some seed starting soil here, and I did wet it first. A lot of people will start with dry soil. Personally, I like to start with the soil already wet. So when I put the seeds, I don't have to inundate the container with water. if you put some seeds in and then you water it really heavy, it might wash the seeds around in the soil. They might go deeper than you want them to be. So instead of worrying about watering it after, I just start with wet soil. So I will scoot some dirt into a container, and a lot of people would stop there, but you want to compress the dirt a little bit. That's going to help the soil maintain moisture, and it's also going to help the plant set roots. If there's a lot of air in between the soil, not only is this going to settle eventually, so you might think you have this much soil, and then you go back the next day and there's only a little tiny bit at the bottom, but it helps the roots to like grab into the soil, spread out. So I'll compress that a little bit. You don't want like a hard brick of soil, but you want it tight. And also when you do wet your soil, so I'll squeeze this together and you can see it it just clumps up. If you're squeezing your soil and there's water draining out, it's probably a little too wet than you want it. Having soil too wet can lead to your seeds rotting in the soil. So you want to make sure you're not overwatering or adding too much water. And then obviously having them too dry, your seeds aren't going to get any water. So you want to just have it wet enough that you can squeeze it together and have it form a soil clump. And then when you are actually going to plant, a lot of things that people get confused about is how deep should I plant the seeds? And that's going to depend on the size of your seed. So here I have some broccoli, and I'll open it up, pour this out. You can see, that was a lot. These seeds are very, very, very tiny, little tiny balls. So the rule of thumb with planting is plant the seed twice as deep as the width of the seed. So this seed's super tiny. So this is only going to have to barely get covered in the soil. So I could literally just do this and press it down a little bit and just barely cover it up, and that's good. I'll put these back in. Yeah, so some seeds will come with a coating. All the coatings are different. Most of the time the coating is either to prevent the seed from rotting in the soil or to keep pests away or to keep disease away. It's harder to find organic seeds with coating, but they're coming up with a lot of more organic coatings for seeds. And that's just, it's a preference thing. You don't necessarily need it, but if it comes with it, it's like, hey, a little bit more protection. And then here, I have a squash seed. If I can get the packet open. I'm going to rip it. That's easier. So this seed is a lot bigger. So that's a squash seed. So this seed's about 1/4 of an inch long. So I'm going to want to plant it about 2/4 of an inch deep. So twice as deep as the size of the seed. So I'm going to stick that one down in there and make sure it's fully covered up. And how deep you plant the seed just depends on the seed. So sometimes with herbs, you'll get like very, very, very tiny seeds that are almost like dust. Those you really just want to sprinkle on top and just kind of like press them in. Make sure they have seed to soil contact. And that just means that they're touching the soil, and that's all you have to do. With bigger seeds, you want to make sure they're actually buried and covered with soil. So, any questions at this point? Awesome. After your seeds are planted, you don't want to let them dry out. A lot of people will cover, that's one thing I forgot to pull out. We have like plastic covers that will fit right on top of this tray. While the seeds are germinating, you can cover them. It creates like a humidity dome over the seeds, so you don't have to worry about checking on them all the time, making sure they have water. But once your plants have germinated, you want to make sure you take that cover off, because you don't want, it's basically the greenhouse effect. It'll get so hot inside of there that it'll burn the plants. So once the seeds have emerged from the soil, you take that cover off, and you want to make sure that they're getting enough water. You can overwater them. For me, what I basically do is I water them. Once I see the soil starting to dry out, I'll water them again. If I look at the soil and it's really damp, it looks dark and damp, I won't water them at all.
Now, I can use like a spray bottle. Is that advisable, or just?
That is too. That's also on our resource list as an optional thing. It's easy for a lot of people, especially if you're in your house starting seeds. You're not going to drag a hose or like a watering can in there. So a spray bottle where you mist the soil every so often definitely works out. With a spray bottle, even with a watering can or anything, some seeds don't like to be wet all the time. Like the actual plant doesn't want to be wet. So if you focus it more on the soil than like above the plant, it helps out a lot. So that's a big advantage with a spray bottle, is you can get in between the plants and not focus directly on top of them. Another thing that I'm realizing I skipped on the resource list are lights. So a lot of people will start their seeds and place them in like a south facing window to make sure they get enough light. But if seedlings aren't getting enough light, then they'll do what these plants are. And you see how long the stem is? That means they're getting leggy. And that means they're like reaching, they're trying to get to light, they're trying to get more space or whatever. So adding supplemental lights can really help. These are just fluorescent lights that you can buy at most home supply stores like Lowe's or anything like that. It might be an additional cost, but it's a one-time cost. So once you buy them, they're there. You don't have to do it ever again. But if you have ample light in a window, usually works out too. One thing that...
Is it regular fluorescent lighting, or do you have to get specific?
For seedlings, you don't have to be too specific. Okay. You can really use any kind of light. Fluorescents are just like the typical thing. Like a regular bulb, it'll work, but it's not a ton of energy, a ton of light for the plants. So fluorescents are usually what people go for. A lot of people get really fancy with like the LEDs or like the high pressure sodium, stuff like that. I don't think you really need that for seed starting. That's more for if you're planning on growing plants inside. You do need like the full spectrum of light for those plants, but for seed starting, you can go pretty basic and they'll do all right. So.
If you had one of those, it wouldn't hurt it.
No, as long as, you know, the issue with lights is some lights create heat. So if you have your lights too close to a plant, you could potentially burn them. With fluorescents, you usually want to have them like about 2 inches away from the plant at the most. Like you don't want to get any closer than that, or else you risk burning the plant. But if you have a good south-facing window, you can always put your plants in the window. They usually do just fine. If you notice they're starting to curve and like reach towards the window, you can just turn them around so they'll curve back the other way. That's actually like helpful for the plant. It helps strengthen the stem if they're, but you don't want to leave them searching for light for too long. So.
And I just want to say, if you're going to use a light fixture over the top, having them pretty close to where they are growing from. So if just hand me that light.
Yeah.
If we were to say this was the tray, and you had just planted, we'd want them pretty low. We want enough space so the light is going to get to sort of all the space here, all the top of the tray. But you're going to want to have it pretty close to the top, so they're not going to start doing this leggy thing. Because once they come up, you sort of want the light to be just above the top of the plant itself. And that's one of the advantages of fluorescent and or even more so LEDs, as opposed to like an incandescent bulb. It's not going to produce as much heat, so it can be closer to provide the light that's needed. So what I do at home is I'll have just some chains with S-hooks. So you can see in the top of the fixture here, there's a couple of little cutouts here. You put S-hooks in there, and I have chains that are then suspended to the structure that I have, just like right above it. And you can just easily move it up a link by link as the plant grows, so the plant or the light can stay just above the top of the plant itself. Okay, does that make sense? All right.
Perfect.
Thanks.
Yeah. Another thing you're going to want to have for your plants are labels. We use popsicle sticks. Super easy. We buy them in bulk. They're cheap. You can write right on them with pen, stick your label in. If you don't label your plants, it's really easy to get them mixed up. Like I always tell people, especially when we're growing tomatoes, I'm like, make sure they're all labeled, because you can't look at a tomato plant and be like, that's a cherry tomato. You don't know until the fruit sets. So it's important to have your plants labeled so you don't misplant or mix anything up. What else do we have on this list? I think that's it.
Oh, you're ready.
Oh, heat mats. Yeah, that's also an option. The advantage of heat mats, so I have heat mats here. I'll show what they look like. So this is a heat mat. You can plug it in, you roll it out, put your trays right on top of it. The advantage of heat mats are they help seeds germinate faster. So a lot of seeds have like a germination temperature that they like. Like for onions, they won't germinate until the soil is about 50 degrees. So I can turn that on. I have a little thermometer that I hook up to it so I can see that the soil is 50 degrees or above. So it'll help your seeds germinate faster. It'll help make sure you don't get below the germination temperature. The danger of using a heat mat is that you can get your soil too hot if you leave your heat mat on too long. So if you're in a temperature controlled area, it's not really necessary, but if you're starting in something like a greenhouse or something like that where you know the temperature fluctuates a lot, it helps to have a heat mat to keep the temperature stable underneath the trays. So, and those you can buy. I don't know if they sell them as much at like Lowe's and stuff. You'd probably have to go online for that, like Amazon, Johnny's, the seed company that we mentioned. They also sell a lot of like seed starting. I'm selling seeds everywhere. They sell a lot of equipment for farmers and too, so you'll probably find a heat mat there too. But maybe online you can just Google heat mat if you want to use one of those. Other things that seedlings need is airflow. That's one issue that we have in here a lot because it's all closed up in the winter. We don't really have a breeze going through here. You can kind of hear we have fans on in there. But plants do need airflow. It helps strengthen the plant to like kind of mimic a natural wind for them. So like if you have a spot that doesn't have a lot of airflow, just like putting a fan nearby to like blow air on the plants. It also keeps them from getting too damp so they don't rot while they're in the tray. So having a little bit of air to go through helps strengthen them, keep them nice and dry, and you should be good. Any questions so far? Thanks. Yeah.
So I see my potting soil from last year that's still in bags. Should I just get rid of that? I mean,
You didn't use it, or it's just
at
in?
all. It's not open.
It's probably fine. Yeah. I mean,
If there's mold in it or anything, should I just get rid of it? Or should I sit it outside to let it breathe? And
you could do that. Yeah. So if you do have soil left over at the end of the year, just making sure, same as seeds, kind of like store it in a dry, cool place so it's not getting too much moisture so you don't have that mold problem. I've had seed starting soil that I've left for like 2 years and it's still fine. The mold is the only issue I would worry about because you could start rotting your seedlings, but yeah.
will it recover if I do something to it, like put some spray in it or like leave it outside for a while? Or should I just like...
If you like spread it out and let it dry out, kill off that mold, but
For the UV.
yeah, leave it in the sun for a little bit.
If it's too much mold,
I would get rid of it, yeah.
should I put it in my compost?
Yeah, absolutely.
Mold will it help break it down more?
Compost loves mold. It'll be great, yep. Yeah, but you definitely can store your soil for a while. You just want to make sure you keep it dry. Yep.
If I sprout my seeds with the napkin and the plastic bag,
Mhm.
after it sprouts, should I use the starting soil, or could I just upgrade to the regular soil,
You're safer going with the seed starting soil.
even though they've already sprouted?
Yep. Plants don't need a lot of nutrients until they really start setting leaves. A lot of things you'll see with seedlings is like nitrogen burn, where they'll start to turn yellow and stuff, and that's because they have too much nitrogen in the soil. A lot of potting soil is very heavy on nitrogen. So when they're little tiny seedlings, I mean, think of it like a baby. Like, you don't want to give a bunch of food to a baby. Like, you stick with the formula, they're good. And then once they start to grow, that's when you want to start introducing more nutrients. So like a lot of the seedlings in here, so grab something like this. Something like this, it's very small. I'm not going to fertilize it at all. But something like this, it's getting bigger in the tray. I'm probably going to put it in the ground before I need to fertilize it. But if something happened, I wasn't ready to plant it, and it's starting to get too big, I might add a little bit of fertilizer to it just to keep it going until it gets into the ground. And with fertilizer, it does kind of help if you fertilize them in the tray right before you plant them. That way you just know like it's got enough nutrients to survive for a little while. But
Does does fertilizing before you transplant, does it help it sort of overcome that potential shock that some plants get?
It can. It definitely can. So that's a good thing. That's the next thing we're going to talk about is what to do with your seedlings before you're going to plant them. So when you're taking these out of the trays and putting them in the ground, something can happen called transplant shock. And it's basically like they're growing in this nice, safe environment, and then you put them in the ground, exposing them to the elements, they go into shock, and they die. So there's a couple things you can do to prevent that. One thing is giving them a little bit of fertilizer before you plant them, and something called hardening off, which is when you take them from the environment that they're in, the nice, safe, temperature-controlled environment, and you stick them outside for a few hours a day, get them adjusted to colder temperatures, wind, rain. You can bring them back in at night if it's going to be really cold. Most of these seedlings, so these are collards, so they don't mind the cold weather. So the first couple days, I'll stick them outside. I'll bring them back in at night. Oh, we got a Bravo. Hello, Bravo. This is the neighbor dog, Bravo. He's going to join our workshop. Hi, John. He's very sweet, so you don't have to worry about him. But once it gets closer to planting date, I will just leave them outside at night. If I know it's not going to freeze, I'm like...
Does it have to be gradual, or the first day you take them outside?
It helps them to be gradual. Yep, do it a few hours at a time, and then generally, like, you increase the time a little bit more.
And it can be in the heat of the day, like the direct sunlight?
Yep. Yep, because that's what they're going to be experiencing when they go out into the garden. So you're just kind of preparing them for that. You gotta go, Bravo. See you later. He likes to come in the greenhouse and hang out sometimes. And you can do that for like a week or two before you plant them, and that helps them get ready for... We were joking about it. We're like, we got to get them ready for the real world. It's just like when you have kids, you got to prepare them to like get out on their own. And then another thing you can do when you plant them, water them directly after they're planted, and that will help prevent the transplant shock. So we've started doing that with all of our brassicas. We're bringing them outside, leaving them out on the tables for a few hours every day, and then bringing them back in at night. That's very important. If you have seedlings that are getting too big before it's time to plant, so let's say I have tomatoes, they're huge, they're crowded, they're starting to get leggy like these plants are, you can move them to a bigger container in the meantime, and that helps prevent them from getting too leggy where they're going to be stunted when you plant them. And I can do a little demonstration of that. So I think these collards are leggy because they're so close together. That's like what we said. We start them in these trays really close together, and then we move them to these bigger trays later. When you're up potting things, it's just really important to not just like rip the plant out. You want to pay attention to the roots. Try to keep as much root intact as you can. So I'm going to pull these apart. So then I've got two plants here. I'm just going to like very gently separate them. You never want to like pull on your plant stems. When they're little like this, they're super tender, sensitive. So you want to very gently handle them. And usually when I'm up potting, I have my container. I'll put a little bit of dirt in, leave room for the roots, and I'll actually bury this. I'll bury a lot of this stem. That's going to help strengthen the plant. Tomatoes, I almost always bury all of the stem because that will actually start to form roots. So the deeper you bury tomatoes, and that's like in general, whether you're up potting them or just planting them in the ground, you want to bury as much of the stem as you can because that's just more root space for your tomato. And then it is. Eggshells are really high in like calcium, a lot of nutrients that they need. I'll do eggshells. A lot of people make an eggshell tea, which I think is really interesting. They'll leave their eggshells in a container, fill it with water, let it sit for a week or two, and then water their plants with it. It stinks, but it helps the plants a lot. It's just extra nutrients for your plants. Like eggshells are really high in calcium. Calcium is a micronutrient, so it's not one of the big three. The big three nutrients are nitrogen, potassium, and phosphorus. You want to make sure that's like what your plants are getting, but they do need the micronutrients like calcium, magnesium.
The finer you can crush the eggshells too. The
Yeah.
more available it's going to be
Yep.
in the soil, and if you're making the seed.
Yeah, we've got a compost pile in the back, and it is full of eggshells, and I'm like, that's great. Yeah.
Are there natural substitutes for those big three minerals?
Well, you know, most compost and stuff. So nitrogen, potassium, and phosphorus, they're all available in organic matter. So like basically any organic matter that you're putting into your garden is going to contain those nutrients. The other nutrients that are harder to get from like regular plant scraps and stuff that we have are the carbon that you need in your soil, and that you'll get from, they're called browns. So like leaves, wood chips. You can even use like cardboard and stuff contains like brown material, shredded paper, stuff like that. So that's the beauty of nature. It's all available. Yeah.
So I have a question. When you say up potting, so it sounds like you don't actually need a bigger pot. You're just spreading them out. Is that right?
Yep. Yeah, you're just giving them a little bit more space. It helps for a bigger pot because then it's more like soil space for the roots to spread out into. But yeah, even if you don't have like a bigger pot necessarily, just getting them a little bit more space will help the plant grow stronger, succeed more. I don't up pot everything. Like I've got this Swiss chard back here. It's doing really good. It looks fine. I'm going to leave it in there until it goes out because I know Swiss chard's going to go out in a week or two. So I'm not going to spend my time worrying about it. But these plants I can tell are getting really leggy. They're getting too tall. They don't look as happy. So just to make sure I give them the best chance of surviving outside, I'm going to...
What kind is that?
These are Collards. Yep. The variety, I think, is Georgia. Yeah. And varieties of your plants, it's not always going to matter, but it just helps to know that, like, the variety you're growing is going to do well in your environment. So, like, a lot of, I get a lot of powdery mildew, which is like a fungus that grows on plants around here. So when I'm buying things that I know are going to be affected by that, I try to buy ones that I know for sure are resistant to the powdery mildew. So like the squash I have here, it even has, oh, I guess this one doesn't, but some of them will say PM in the name, and that means it's got powdery mildew resistance. So I'm like, okay, that's a variety I want. So not a huge difference, but it's that little bit of difference that will make your garden successful.
That could be a lot of rain.
Yes. Yeah, last year, June, it didn't rain at all, and then July was all rain, and my squashes were not happy. But the ones that I had that were resistant to those diseases did a lot better than the ones that didn't. So just something to keep in mind when you're shopping. All right. And last thing I have on here is when to start in containers and when to direct sow. So most of your onions, herbs, and brassicas, things in the brassica family are like kale, collards, broccoli, cabbage, cauliflower. Those things can all be started in like February, March. You can also start your greens like lettuce, spinach, arugula, stuff like that. You can start that pretty early in March because they can handle the cold weather. If I were to plant these outside today and they got frosted overnight, there's a really high chance that they would survive. I'd be fine. Stuff that is more suited for growing in hot weather, like tomatoes, eggplants, peppers, you want to start a little bit later, like mid-April, May, to make sure that by the time they're ready to go out in June, you're past the frost date, you don't have to worry about them. So, yeah. Oh, another thing I want to mention that's really nice with these, if you start in takeout containers, is they have this top that comes with them. And there's a term for it, and I can't remember, but you can fill the bottom with water. Bottom watering. That's what it's...
I was going to ask about that.
Yeah, so that can help if you have containers like this. You fill it with water on the bottom and you stick it in, and then the water will absorb from the bottom of the container, and you won't have to overhead water them as much, which is really beneficial for the plants because, like I said, not a lot of plants like to be covered in water all day. It helps encourage funguses and rot and stuff like that. So if you can bottom water, It's a really awesome, easy way to water. So you just put the water in the bottom. When the water's gone, you fill it back up. Your seeds are good to go.